Yeah, I'll kick it off. Thank you again for being here today, Catherine. I'm super excited to hear your stories. I've had a great time working with the Mohawk team. So we actually had one of your colleagues on, Jacqueline, a few weeks ago, share some of her insights and stories about how she's, done different things along the way to end up in the role she's in now.
Oh,
And we
cool.
have found, yeah, it's been really cool to hear about people's unique career journeys. I think the viewers
Hmm.
really appreciate that. So to kind of start off, our episode with you today, I'd love to hear a bit about your journey so far and, what you've kind of done along the way to get to where you are today.
Well, I've had a few careers. I feel like I'm that typical Gen Xer who kind of just, changes jobs and careers. I'm probably on my fourth or fifth one. Had aspirations of being a documentary filmmaker
Oh,
back in the early 90s, and that didn't pan out. And I went back to school and got my BA in linguistics and ended up working as it's called a communicative disorders assistant,
okay.
just basically a speech therapist assistant, and worked for a number of years with preschoolers who had speech and language difficulties.
Wow.
But I have a bit of a shelf life when it comes to careers. I often sort of hit that 5 to 10 years and get itchy for something different, something new. And I decided to go into teaching. I had actually gone to Poland for a year in the 90s to teach English
Oh, cool.
and really liked it and wanted to work with adults. And so I went back and got my master's in education and then started teaching communications and also ESL in post-secondary.
Here,
And then
back to do that here.
of Toronto, Hamilton,
Yeah,
Waterloo, so kind of everywhere. Um, the work is precarious, it's always contract work, so you kind of go where you can. And worked for quite a while at George Brown College before I moved to Hamilton, and then uh, was really pursuing getting a full-time position at Mohawk. But while teaching, I found that there was a lack of time to help students, to support them in their needs. And I found myself wanting to do that, to kind of get away from the teaching and more into the support. And I was very lucky that a part-time position opened with City School at Mohawk to work as a learning support specialist. And then it's through that and other connections at the college that I ended up in my full-time job with programs for newcomers. So I support immigrants who are learning English in our program. So that's sort of my career in a nutshell.
Okay, I'm always glad I asked because it's so interesting to hear, how different people have navigated really entirely different industries and fields, taken some things they've learned along the way and started to use them in different areas. So, I'd love to ask questions kind of about things you learned from your early career, but you mentioned something I'd like to ask first, which is around, this interest you had in helping students with some of the needs you noticed in class that maybe weren't addressed by curriculum or something like that. So what were
Hmm.
those kind of things you noticed that students needed help with?
So they needed help with learning strategies. Like they often didn't know how to learn and what their strengths and weaknesses were, or needed extra support with their writing skills. Because in the communications courses that all college students have to take in order to graduate, there's a lot of writing, essay writing, report writing,
Hey,
emails, etc. And a lot of them didn't have that coming out of high school. And so they needed extra support with writing and grammar and and then not just English language learners, domestic students as well
for sure.
didn't always have those skills.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
it's helpful to know because I do feel that's an area that yeah, might, be taken for granted that students have that ability. But
Hmm.
there are a number of students, yeah, who have unique needs. And I've noticed that kind of throughout my work with the schools as well, is that everyone does learn a little differently. So it's always nice to hear, when folks like yourself have invested time into finding ways to help these individual students. So I'm sure they must have really appreciated that and kind of the role you're doing now, um,
Hmm.
with finding ways to help people that have just, yeah, these, areas that are really important, but that they might be struggling with. So, um,
Yes.
yeah, and how do you approach that now in your work with newcomers? What are some of the strategies that you use to help students in some of those areas?
I like to find a little bit about their background, right? So, because there's so many different situations, we have immigrants who come here highly, highly educated, and
Right.
we also have those who weren't even able to complete high school. And so there's such a range. So, some of them really are may even have uh, literacy challenges in their first language. So it's important to get that background to find out where they're at and what their educational experience has been, and then go from there to find out what they're struggling with and what are their strengths. Are they a visual learner, kinesthetic, auditory, and then to use those strengths to their advantage, and figure out what's going to work for them, and then also have a conversation with their teachers as well to let them know what the students need to be successful and feel good
Yeah.
about themselves. Too often immigrants are very hard on themselves, like, oh, my English is bad, it's bad, it's bad. And it's like, no, you're fine. I can understand you. And they're always striving for perfection. And I'm like, listen, your grammar is better than a lot of people who learned English as a first language. But they do tend to be quite hard on themselves.
Well, that's super helpful to know because I think that's going to help a lot of other, professionals out there. So I'm glad you shared that piece just about getting to know some of these folks to see, yeah, what are their unique challenges. And you made a good point. I never thought about that. Some of them, might have had literacy challenges in their own language, and that's worth, or their first language, and that's worth knowing as you try to approach the challenge and help them learn a second language. So that's a really
Mhm.
helpful insight. But I also just appreciate, the fact that you're there to help them gain confidence because I think that's where a lot of it also stems from is just that it's intimidating. I would not be able to interview for a job or something like that in a second language at all.
Right?
So just letting them know, "Hey, you're doing all right," is nice, just to have someone they can talk to about that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I enjoy making those connections, especially now that we're also in person more. When I started the job, we were still online. And so it was a challenge, but now in person, because they definitely want to meet in person. They don't want to meet on Zoom.
Ah,
And it's nice to build those relationships, and it they you have to build trust with them. And once they have that trust, then they'll keep coming back to you.
yeah, absolutely, and that does just take time, and I do feel like that's easier to do in person, as
Hmm.
um, now I actually met a student over the weekend, they were coming from Turkey, and they were, I believe, practicing dentistry there, but none of those skills or certifications, I should say, are recognized in Ontario. And so they're kind of back at the beginning, going through a dental program again. And
Yeah.
do you ever have, students like that? And how do you kind of help them navigate having to go through something like that?
Oh, it's so common, and I mean, it gets me really riled up actually, because it's unfortunately, I think a lot of countries are so told something that isn't true about when they come to Canada. Oh, you're really educated, you can come here, you can use your education, no problem. And then they find out no. And so we have this is quite common with dentistry. I have a couple of students who have actually been dentists and looking into not even they look at what they have to do become a dentist here. They're like, I can't invest those years and money. So some of them will go into dental hygienist programs, but even that is a commitment. We have people in my program as well as myself that talk to them about what their goals are, if they want to use the same education, because if they do, they can get some credits in the programs. There's a whole process where they have to get their education properly evaluated. And it's not cheap to get that done. It can be hundreds of dollars to get their documents translated and then assessed. but at least then if they get some credit for some of their work, they may not have to do the whole program. So it might take a little less time, maybe cost a little less money. Um, I empathize with them, and and tell them, I'm really sorry, this is the situation. This is how Canada has set it up, unfortunately. Some of them decide, you know what, this is my chance to just try something new. I went into this because I was making me money in this country, but I didn't really like it. So, we have, lawyers that are like, I want to go into be a social service worker.
Fair enough.
And yeah, so there's those stories as well, and they just take it as opportunity to recreate themselves.
And it's funny you say that. That sounds like what this individual is going to do, but it's helpful to know that there's some kind of evaluation program that might at least give them credit for some of the work they have done. Uh,
Hmm.
So is that done through, an institution like Mohawk, or is that done through a separate government program, or how do you do that kind of an evaluation?
So the one that we use the most commonly is called WES, but it's WES.
Okay.
And basically it's an organization. So you create an account, fill out an application, what country did you get your education? Then you ask your country, your institution to send the documents directly to West so they can evaluate them. And you can do either like an evaluation of just the degree you have, or you can do course by course. Um, and it can be expensive. And some countries, it's not possible because of war. So there's countries like Afghanistan, for example, where they know as long as the students have copies of their education, they will take the copies from the students, whereas other countries, it's got to come directly from the institution. So it's called, sorry, World Education Services.
Okay.
And they assess, but again, it can also cost hundreds of dollars. Sometimes there is some funding for that through employment agencies, and that is something that we can do. We have a employment specialist in our program who will help people in the community, not just in our program, help people navigate that system, because it can be confusing for
That is
sure.
yeah, that is really, really helpful to hear and know that there's actual people you can talk to guide you through it. I'm gonna reach out
Hmm.
to this student I met and let him know about that, because it doesn't sound like, it sounds like, I know you're saying it's expensive, and certainly it sounds like it's costly, but when you compare it to having to go through an entire, diploma or degree program again, it might well be worth it for some people. So I'm really,
Yes.
you mentioned it. Um,
Yes, for sure. And there are also our program now, and this is only for permanent residents, not citizens. We do have some programs, some mentoring programs. We have occupation specific language training programs. So we have some programs for professionals who are looking to get language training or some mentorship into their field. But again, it's only for people who are like refugees, permanent residents, not for people who are already citizens.
okay, that's
Yeah.
helpful to know as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, we'll definitely put a link to that in this episode for those watching, and um, those that are curious about trying to go through a program like that. That is super helpful. Catherine, thanks for
Hmm.
sharing that one. Um,
Yeah, there are ways. Yeah,
yeah,
it's not, you don't always have to start at the beginning, hopefully.
yeah, and I mean, you make a good point too, because it sounds like that this student I met was pretty discouraged about having to go through dentistry, from the beginning. And so
Hmm.
they were looking at other programs like computer science and things like that. So Uh, sometimes I'm sure it can be a blessing in disguise for some folks who are, like you said, doing
Yes.
something they actually didn't enjoy. Um, and so it's encouraging to know that, hey, that's not nothing wrong with that either. You don't have to end up back in the same field, but if you want to, there are resources that can help you. So really nice to know about kind of the different ways you could approach that.
I
Um,
think it's also, I think it's also a way of thinking, right? So Canada, like I said, being Gen X, I think that a lot of us we didn't always stay with the same job. Like our parents, baby boomers, it was like, here's my job. I'm here for 35 years. I retire. Here's my gold watch. Yay, I collect my pension. It's very different now. People have changed careers. And so when people come from other countries, they have that similar mindset. Well, I was a dentist, so I must continue being a dentist. And so I think it's also a mindset that you don't have to stay in that career forever. And it's an adjustment for them.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great point to make. I'm really glad you said that. I think that's gonna, liberate quite a few people in a way that they feel like, hey, yeah, that's true. I can change things up. And that's why I love asking, questions like at the beginning, like, what have you sort of done along the way? Because, to go from documentary filmmaking as an interest to going back to school, it's like, you've done it. So when it comes from
Mhm.
someone like you, it's easy to say, "Hey, it's been done." I know what it takes, and it makes it feel so much more possible,
Yes.
to do. And I did want to ask a little bit about that. Um, how did you end up navigating that early on? Because as a side point, I think filmmaking is one of my passions as well. So I totally resonate with the interest in doing something like that. Mine's more on fiction, that kind of thing.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I love writing and film, and I have a lot of friends in the industry as well. Um,
Cool.
but when you decided to kind of switch gears, how did you approach it? Did you start researching schools or programs, or what kind of did you do in that transition period to kind of move from one thing to the next?
Well, I know that I was working, film didn't work, and then I was kind of working retail and kind of lost and knew this isn't what I wanted to do and knew I was going to have to upgrade my education if I had any hope of, having options. And so I started York, part-time York University, part-time, and was working towards my BA and got pregnant. Was married at the time, got pregnant with my kid.
Congrats.
And so that took a very little time off and then continued. And I actually transferred to U of T and finished my degree. So it was more that I realized that options were limited because yes, I had a college diploma, but it was very specific, and I knew that doors would open if I got my bachelor's of arts at university, and it did open a lot of doors, for sure, and gave me options. Yeah.
Oh, that is really cool. Thanks for sharing that story with us as well, Catherine, because that again just feels like, hey, I feel like that's a story I've heard from job seekers too. They're working, retail, or they're working a survival job for them because they have to and they need to find
Mhm.
something. And some people enjoy those positions and that's fantastic. And others are doing that until they can figure out what they want to do next. And so it's really helpful to hear, you managed to do that, start a part-time kind of program, navigate, becoming a mother, which is amazing. And then finding your way into your next program, and then it happens in pieces. It doesn't have to all happen at once.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. I
So
will say too that I also like to put it in perspective too, at the time I was going, I was living in Toronto. It was also economically was very different back then. I mean, I was paying for a one-bedroom apartment. My husband and I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with my kid, and we were paying like $600 a month rent, like, in 1999. So, I mean, it was also a different time when things were also a little more affordable. And so I also want to put that, it's not like, I know that it is definitely more of a challenge and more that students have to balance because they do have to work while going to school and it can be challenging.
absolutely. No question about it. Thanks for saying that as well. It is a difficult period, I think, for anyone kind of going through a job transition. But it's helpful to know that, there are people who have navigated it that are here to help. And so, if folks are watching this one and going, I'd love to speak to Catherine, is it possible for folks to reach out to you or the Mohawk team, or do they need to be students, or how does that kind of thing work?
So generally, yes, we service the students who are in the program for newcomers department. So who students who are taking um taking the courses and such. I mean, certainly if people had some questions or wanted to know, where they could get some help, I could definitely direct them, because we do have an employment specialist, as I said, who also does help people in the community, not just,
Right.
we actually have two. So they also help people in the community as well as our students. So I could also refer them to those two people as well if they had questions.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's super helpful to know. So again, for those watching this episode here, now you know you can reach out and learn a bit more, or if you're interested in Mohawk as an institution, you kind of know there's a team there ready and excited to help. And um, kind of going along that, when students do come through the center, to work through a newcomer program,
Mhm.
what are some of the things you're noticing um, are the most helpful for them to kind of navigate the next step? Is it helping them get resumes built? Is it helping them kind of prepare for the interview? What's kind of the focus for them? What are they kind of, or is it different for everyone?
I mean, I do think it's different, but most students who come to the, because it's a link program, so language instruction for newcomers to Canada. And there are a few places besides at Mohawk that run those programs. But people come to Mohawk because in order to apply to college, you have to have a CLB, which Canadian language benchmark. You have to have a 7.
Uh,
And if you apply to Mohawk, Mohawk will accept a letter from our program saying, yes, this student has reached level 7. Whereas if you go to another school, you have to take a language proficiency test to prove your language proficiency. So a lot of people come specifically to our program because they're interested in Mohawk. So I think one of the most important things is getting that language level, is working at getting your language level up so that you can apply to school. Or it's not just even that, getting that level 7 opens many doors. So it's not just applying to college, it's also they can do academic upgrading. Let's say they need a science course in order to go into a course, or a math course. You have to be that 7 to even take academic upgrading. So getting that level of language really opens up doors for them.
okay, and that's helpful to know for those who are trying to improve their CLB level. Do you have recommendations on how to improve their skill or resources they can use, programs they can be a part of as they work towards that proficiency?
I think, everyone learns differently. And of course, depending on where they started and their educational background. But I think it's just making the commitment and and realizing that it takes time. So a lot of students just have that 7 in mind, and they're like, they have this often not realistic view of how long it can take to get
Right.
to that level, because especially if they're doing part-time, right? If they have to work and they're taking part-time, it can take a year to go up a level.
Fair enough. That's good to know to make a
Yeah.
timeline out of it.
Exactly. So realizing that it does take time, and it takes commitment, going to the class, doing the work, and seeking extra help from me if they are struggling with something. For example, doing that extra practice. But I think it's realizing that it can take time, and to try and be patient and let their brains do what they need to do. Yeah.
Yes, no question about that. That's helpful to know, put a number on it as well, because I do think, yeah, when you have a goal like that in mind and you're just thinking as soon as possible, it can get discouraging when you're not there yet. But if you kind of know, hey, it could take a year, you kind of can pace yourself and not burn out and not get discouraged. So uh,
Yes.
that is super helpful to know.
Mhm.
Um, and as students become more proficient in it, do you provide guidance around how to start applying for jobs and that kind of thing, or is it primarily to reach that level and then kind of evaluate what they want to do next, whether it's further education or kind of start job seeking?
They often want jobs while they're in school because they need, they do get some help from the government, but it's either not enough or it runs out, right, after a year or so. So often they need those survival jobs as you talked about. So we do have the two employment specialists who can help with that. And I can also help with, and have helped students with resumes and cover letters. And so they often will say, I need help. Can you help me with my resume? And, we look at it. And I've done some workshops and classes as well, the different types of resumes, how to write a cover letter, things like that. So it is definitely part of what we do. And many already come saying, okay, now I'm taking classes. Now I also need to find a job, and they seek out that help.
Okay, that's great to know. And if you kind of had to summarize a few of the things, recommendations that you maybe make most often for students that bring, a resume to you for the first time, are there any kind of like things that come top of mind that you would say, hey, make sure of this, this, and this, to kind of get you ahead?
I think recognizing that what skills they got, not just out of a job, but any volunteer or a position, like that it isn't always work experience. I think including any of that volunteer experience they've had, and thinking about, okay, what did I do? What was I responsible for in this volunteer position, and pulling out those skills. And also the cover letter. A lot of them don't know to include a cover letter.
Uh,
And so that's important, is constructing that, and getting them comfortable talking and bragging about themselves, right? They're not really that comfortable doing that. So no, you have to tell them how great you are and what you can do, and sell yourself. And so I think making sure they do that, and also tailor it to the position that they're applying for, and tweaking it here and there.
and can they include, like, would you recommend they include work or volunteer experience from outside of Canada? Is that okay to include?
Absolutely, yes. I think, often they'll say, well, I have no Canadian experience. I said,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter. Like, put in anything and really pull out those key responsibilities, because it's not just about the responsibilities, is the employers want to look at, do you recognize the skills that you have and how they'll apply to this job?
Okay, that is super helpful to know because I've heard students say that too. And my, you know, um, instinct is to say, no, if you've done it abroad, you might even have a different perspective on how this is done, or um, in no way less valuable experience. So I always think it's the right thing to do, but I'm glad
Absolutely.
someone in your role, yeah, that had, include the volunteer experience. Because I've heard some students say, hey, can I include what I've learned in school, even though it's not
Yes.
work? And I'm like, "Yeah, I would think so. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yes.
experience.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think so too, because, like if you've learned how to do lab work, or,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, a variety of things. You have to, especially if you don't have that experience, you have to pull it out of school and things like that. Was there a placement in school, or did they have a co-op? Depending, what their situation was.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Catherine. We're already at the time. Actually, we're a little over the time I asked you for today.
My
So
pleasure.
yeah, I really appreciate it. And any sort of final thoughts you'd like to leave with other professionals helping newcomers, um, or job seekers themselves, newcomers, anything kind of to close off our episode today?
I just think keeping an open mind, right? Like not coming with sort of tunnel vision with, well, this is what I did, so this is what I have to continue doing. It's just have an open mind, and that, to seek out other opportunities that can utilize the skills that you've come here with.
That's super helpful. Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. And thank you for all the insights you shared today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. Have a great rest of your day, and
Yeah,
hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
great. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.